Hey guys, it's Faye, and today's video is something a little bit different, a Path of Exile build guide. I decided to build a Scorching Ray, Searing Touch Trickster, or the Searing Scorchster for short, because hey, I love fire skills, and I feel this is an excellent budget league starter, with room for pricey upgrades as the league goes on. Scorching Ray has a somewhat middling reputation, mainly around survivability issues. I found that when you build for cast speed and add a bit of duration, this isn't the case at all. Bosses generally melt quickly, and regular enemies are usually dead within one flick of the beam. I chose to use a Searing Touch unique staff for this build. It has a lot of great synergies with Scorching Ray. There's nothing bad to say about Searing Touch. It's like a match made in heaven with Scorching Ray since everything on it scales the skill. You could also use a +3 rare staff, of course, but Searing Touch is generally pretty common and very budget friendly these days, though maybe a bit less because of Scorching Ray being introduced this league. And I'm focusing on this build as a league starter primarily. This build can melt at Zeri decently and defeat Uber Azara without much difficulty at all. Notice how I tried to get some stacks of Scorching Ray on Azaro, and then get the hell out of there. With cast speed, you can very quickly get to the maximum 8 stacks of the Scorching Ray dot, and the duration from the tree helps the dot keep ticking even while you're not casting. There's no reason to keep channeling in dangerous situations any more than you have to, as you cannot have multiple instances of the Scorching Ray dot. This also makes having a Scorching Ray spell totem redundant, so I opted out of using one. Tier 15 maps aren't much of a problem either. Calm is very quickly melted by the Searing Scorchster, even though he had 27% more life on this particular map. Map mods are very flexible with the build. The only one I would probably never even try is a stasis map mod with no regen of mana or energy shield. The regular reduced regen maps are usually not a problem. This build should be able to do Shaper. Sadly, I didn't have the time to level my gems to 20 since Scorching Ray came out pretty recently, or the Shaper pieces needed to test the Shaper himself. However, I found a Maze of the Minotaur map, so I opted to try the boss out for the first time ever. In all honesty, a bad lightning run through made me have only one death. If I can do this with Scorching Ray with no prior experience fighting this boss, people who have experience with these bosses could definitely kill the Shaper and his guardians, most likely even the Phoenix since it's technically immune to Ignite and not the Scorching Ray degen. Something important to note is that gem quality of Scorching Ray affects beam length, and can be increased to a maximum of 10% at 20% gem quality. This directly impacts your survivability and clear speed. Being able to be farther away while casting is a big deal, and the longer beam also clears screens of enemies faster. You can play Scorching Ray a lot of different ways, so why a self-cast Trickster? I chose the Shadow's Trickster Ascendancy class since it just worked really well with this particular build. Trickster gets Patient Reaper, and with it a form of recovery to help the fact that Scorching Ray can't leech since it's a degen. The increased recovery rate is key to survivability, and it comes with a nice damage over time bonus. Get this first from your normal lab points. Next up, Ghost Dance and Shade Form. Ghost Dance gives you faster energy shield recharge and a bit of dodge, which never hurts. More important is Shade Form, which gives you a massive 250 to maximum energy shield and 20% cast speed if energy shield recharge has started recently. I opted to get to Ghost Dance and Shade Form with both my Cruel and Merciless lab points respectively. 2.5's patch notes brought a nice buff to the Trickster Ascendancy for the Weave the Arcane node. Initially I was torn on whether to choose Weave the Arcane or Walk the Aether for the cast speed. Now I'm definitely sold on Weave the Arcane. The mana regen and chance to recover 10% of your maximum mana lets you respec out of some mana nodes on the tree, And most importantly, the buff in 2.5, if you spend 200 mana, you get a flat damage taken reduction of 8%. You will be spending that much mana channeling Scorching Ray, and this helps out so much when you're most vulnerable while you're casting. So, how does this build work? Basically, Scorching Ray is a dot beam that causes a burning degen, and it scales really well with cast speed, elemental damage, damage over time, spell damage, and burning damage. It can apply a maximum of 8 stacks, each having -3 to fire resistance, for a total of -24 to fire resistance when an enemy has the maximum amount of Scorching Ray stacks. I found that cast speed is the #1 priority. It affects how quickly an enemy accumulates the Scorching Ray degen stacks, and is key to your survivability since it affects how quickly you can spin and position while casting, and how fast your degen will add up on bosses especially. The passive tree is pretty standard for what you'd expect from an elemental damage over time build. Cast speed is king, so I took both the nimbleness and mental rapidity notable clusters. Of course, there's also Whispers of Doom for dual cursing. I chose to go CI with a focus on life to energy shield regen by using the keystone Zealot's Oath. Scorching Ray can't leech, so I felt that this was the best option for survivability. The DPS keystones I'm using are Elemental Overload and Elemental Equilibrium. Orb of Storms can proc both of these, so it's great for the build. Right next to Elemental Equilibrium, I grabbed the Potency of Will Duration cluster to the left of the Scion starting area, so my degen stacks would stay on enemies longer for quality of life purposes. I opted to take the route of not running any auras besides Discipline, since degen can't make use out of a lot of the damage auras. Because of this, the Clear Mind Unique Jewel made the most sense for the added spell damage. I also used an Essence Worm, so I could run Discipline without reserving any mana. This isn't necessary to run the build, but it's something you should invest in when you can. I usually play the Standard Challenge League, so the prices mentioned will be what they were like in Standard Essence League. Essence Worm rings usually go for about 15C, and Clear Mind Jewels can go anywhere from 1 to 10C plus depending on the rolls. Aim to get the closest to 60% spell damage that you can on your Clear Mind Jewel. Take the Stun Prevention while casting cluster near the Practical Application notable until you can get a cheap Valyrium ring. Last league they are about 1 to 2C. Eventually you want an Eye of Cheola amulet, and they go for about 15 to 16C. Get an uncorrupted one for the attributes, you're gonna need them. Eye of Cheola is a really good solution, it prevents stun entirely, but the Breach League is here with new uniques. One in particular, Zophethak's Heart, seems like it'd be a really good fit for this build. It would require that you have all the stun prevention while casting from the tree that you can get, but it's just a solid amulet. It gives a great amount of strength, which helps gem leveling requirements. It has increased fire damage, which benefits Scorching Ray, and it covers enemies in ash when they hit you. Covering enemies in ash get the ash debuff, which causes them to take increased fire damage and reduces their movement speed. It seems like a great survivability tool, and synergizes with Scorching Ray's DPS nicely. I don't know how rare this amulet will be, but depending on that, it could be a great addition to the build. As a quick note, my bandits are passive, a Lyra for the cast speed, and another passive. The cast speed was just too good to pass up, and not taking anything else made the most sense. Next up, skills and gear. Scorching Ray is in the Searing Touch to benefit from the extra gem levels the staff gives. I use Controlled Destruction and Elemental Focus for more damage multipliers. Not being able to ignite because Elemental Focus isn't a problem since Scorching Ray doesn't use ignites to cause its degen. Faster casting is important so you can get that super useful cast speed, and stack the debuff and spin more quickly. Rapid Decay completes the trio of more multiplier damage supports, and the duration from the tree counters the duration penalty of the gem. Lastly, if you're lucky enough to get a 6 link, go for Empower. While I was testing, Empower was already the better option for DPS over increased burning damage. It's even better now since Scorching Ray is getting a buff in 2.5 of 10% more damage at level 20. Orb of Storms is your cursing setup / elemental overloaded equilibrium enabler, and should be linked to Curse on Hit, Temporal Chains for survivability and degen synergy, and either vulnerability or increased critical strikes to proc elemental overload more often. You can change out vulnerability for increased critical strikes once you get a Witchfire Brew unique flask for blasphemy vulnerability in a bottle. This might take some time since it costs roughly 35 to 40 C usually. Ideally, your utility setup would be on a rare, high-energy shield chest piece and be a 5-link of Vol Discipline, Vol Lightning Trap, Enduring Cry, Faster Casting, and Increased Duration. As you can see here, I have 2 4-links for my utility setup, but it's not what I would want to end up with. The other setup to worry about is getting Flame Dash, Faster Casting, Vol Clarity in case of a mana emergency, and Increased Duration. I chose the Strength Int-based 2-tone boots for resist, and to be able to easily roll 4 red sockets for my cast on damage taken setup, which is pretty standard. Also, the fingerless silk gloves base is great since it has a spell damage implicit. My gear is very so-so, but still very reliable. I found the Overflowing Chalice unique flask useful to get my curse in a bottle and my other utility flask refilled quickly, and it has the Consecrated Ground effect for life regen and a 40% increased damage buff. Of course, Taste of Hate is good and probably the most expensive goal item for this build. I also have a Staunching Basalt and Quicksilver flask. It's all pretty standard stuff. While leveling, focus on getting to at least level 18 and having a 3-link for when you first start using Scorching Ray. This is so you can link Scorching Ray to Elemental Focus and Controlled Destruction. It'll be slow going at first, but will improve as you level, and especially once you get a 4-link with Faster Casting. Level with Firestorm until you feel comfortable with Scorching Ray, since it benefits from some of your passive nodes. Feel free to use Clarity until you can afford an Essence Worm and a Clear Mind unique jewel. Your first big goal should be to save roughly 15 C for an Eye of Chiyula amulet to prevent from being stunned. Get your Searing Touch at level 60 and just keep gearing up from there. This build is really not that gear dependent and can run just fine on a 5-link Searing Touch as your only real requirement. I just chose to use an Eye of Chiyula and an Essence Worm with Clear Mind, but I do feel the extra spell damage really helps. My one major gripe with this build is how the beam deals with some walls and ledges in the environment. It sometimes feels like the old Glacial Cascade issues, but it hasn't been that big of a deal. It's really just a minor gripe from me. GGG has already improved this once with a patch. The skill also used to target lock on random loot, but this has been fixed in the 2.5 Breach patch. Overall, this build should be an excellent league starter and carry you to acquiring your initial league currency, which you can either put into this build or fund an alternate character with. It's pretty budget friendly since it should only cost roughly 75 to 80 C total for your Searing Touch, Eye of Chiyula, Essence Worm, decently rolled Clear Mind Jewel, and a Witchfire Brew. Whether your goal is pushing Atlas and mapping, farming Uberlab, or bossing in general, this build should have you covered. I have information about the build in a Google document link below for easy reference, and also timestamps to each part of the guide in the description. If you have any questions about the build, feel free to ask. I'll try to help as best I can. Thank you so much for watching.